Love that. Hi, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started with our latest GeekED panel, if you don't mind. And this is Caring for the Nerd Mind. This is a panel I'm very excited about moderating for. My name is Alfred Day. I work as Assistant Dean of Students and Director of the Center for Support and Intervention at the University of California, Berkeley. My pronouns that I use are he and him. And I'm going to have our panelists introduce themselves, say a little bit about where they work, where they're at, sort of what their connection is to the topic of this panel. And as we like to do, if you all could sort of say, what is the best thing you've seen this weekend, the thing that you would mortgage your house and sell your little sister to get? Mine is a Hush statue, Batman Hush statue at the Sideshow booth. And my little sister should probably leave the state because I'm about to sell her.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here. My name is Dr. Brent Crandal. I work at Rady Children's Hospital here in San Diego. The pronouns that I use are he, him, and his. And I'm a little bit off from this panel. I work at a children's hospital, and I help run the behavioral health department there, and I help also systems in the state become more trauma-informed. I've done a lot of work in behavioral health. I just happen to be a nerd myself, and I love Batman, lifetime Batman fan, but also this year, the thing that's like totally getting me like blowing up my skirt is the Spider-Man Spider-Verse. Is that a horrible term? Sorry. The Spider-Verse is really like just blowing my mind, and I have loved that. And so I haven't seen as much Spider-Gwen, but my daughter is all about Spider-Gwen, so that's what I've been looking for on the exhibit hall, and so that's my jam.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Dr. Andrea Letamendi. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I'm a clinical psychologist and mental health educator at UCLA. My title is the Associate Director of Mental Health Training, Intervention, and Response for Residential Life at UCLA. Nothing else fits on my card. I'm excited to be here. I also intersect psychology and mental health and fictional narrative. So my podcast is called The Arkham Sessions. It is all about the psychology of Batman. And I partner with Warner Brothers Home Entertainment, and I do their on-screen commentary for their Blu-ray releases. So Hush just came out, so now I can announce that I am in the commentary, I'm in the bonus features talking about psychological science and Batman in the Hush Blu-ray and DVD.
And weren't you in the last one as well? Most recently?
I was in Justice League versus Fatal 5.
Right.
I'm also in the Gotham full complete series that came out, I think, earlier this month. So yeah, the Warner Brothers DC Home Entertainment folks have been really kind to me and included me in their stuff. Related to Hush, Mondo has an awesome Hush poster, which I spotted, and the line was capped. So that was at about 10:30 one morning, and they said no sales until 6 p.m. later today. So that's when I said I cannot have access to this. So I would do a lot to get to that item.
I'm like so starstruck now. I'm so sad. I did not know this about you.
But Brian, we've known each other for a long time. No need.
I know, it's like weird, right? Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brian Arau. My pronouns are he, him, and his. And I am the Associate Dean of Students at UC Santa Cruz. I relate to the topic of caring for the nerd mind through my role as Associate Dean. I supervise two programs that are pretty important with respect to student mental health on our campus. One of them being called Slug Support. UC Santa Cruz is the land of the banana slugs, and so we brand everything as slug something. Slug Support is our student affairs case management program, so very similar to the work that Al does at UC Berkeley, where our team of case managers works with students who are experiencing a wide range of different challenges and difficulties and helps them figure out how to navigate through them, and a lot of those difficulties relate back to mental health concerns. I also supervise our basic needs programs at UC Santa Cruz, so programs that are designed to help students who are experiencing food insecurity, housing insecurity, and financial insecurity. And those programs often connect back to, they create a lot of distress when students are experiencing basic needs insecurity, and so that's another way that I relate to today's topic. Best thing I've seen at convention. I don't know if just like the entire Marvel panel yesterday counts, but I'm still glowing. But in terms of like a physical thing that I could take with me, Sideshow has this beautiful Hawkman statue. It's beautiful. And yeah, like if I could have, I don't know where I would put it. My husband wouldn't let me put it anywhere in the house, to be very honest. But even though it's like so beautiful, it's amazing. It's like also like what, $2,000? I don't know. It's more than I can spend on a statue.
Yeah, I'm starstruck now. Drea, you do everything. I love it. My name is Sarah Molatoris. I'm a resident director at UCLA Residential Life. I use she, her, and her pronouns. I have worked with UCLA Geek Week for the last couple years, and in my day-to-day work, I work directly with students and also as a first responder, and so often interfacing with students in distress, both that are residents in my building or like for the entire campus community at times. I think that I've been really struggling to think of my fandoms. I really like graphic novels, so I really like reading. I love coming of age tales that are set in graphic novels. That's really like my super geekdom, and I think the thing, and it's not unattainable, so it's kind of a silly buy, but I saw these folks who were drawing pet portraits within fandom. So you could say because I love Harry Potter and Wonder Woman, and so I think I could get my dog drawn as a Gryffindor, and I think a really fancy version of that would be my extra splurge, sell my soul thing.
It'd be amazing. I forgot about that Hawkman statue. It's just insane. I can't believe anybody can afford it. Let's talk about our work, and let's talk about students and mental health. And before we get into some of the darker sort of aspects, I'm actually interested in sort of how the folks on the panel would define sort of geek identity among students, and maybe some positive ways you've seen a student sort of identifying as geek been in a healthy type of expression.
I can jump in. I appreciated what the previous panel explained and kind of disclosed about their own identities and how being your authentic self is essentially what we strive to do within all of the different ways that we might describe ourselves, certainly with that geek aspect as well. So I would say that that's certainly a part of that expression and presentation. Can you authentically in your work life, in your personal life, in all aspects of your personhood, can you express yourself in your authentic way? And that I would say is, holistic. That's a healthy pattern. That's something that would be that I would consider would be promoting your well-being.
I'd like to add to that just the idea that we each have our own spider sense in terms of what makes us passionate. And aside from geek culture and nerd culture, everybody's out there kind of resonating with different media and different things resonate for each of us. And for a while, being a geek or a nerd was something that would get you bullied. Dre and I were talking about this beforehand, that it wasn't something that was kosher, until maybe Iron Man came out. But even now, there's this special love that we have for the stuff that is at Comic-Con and for the pop culture stuff that we're all kind of discussing here. And when our spider sense goes off for that, it shows that we have this kind of shared identity in some way. And I think that we have those identities. I think our spider sense goes off for that because there's some healing or pain that we're working out that it makes it resonate for us. Mm-hmm. And so it says something about us that's what's setting it off. And I think that we kind of share that at the con. And I think that's something that's really special about being here together.
I really appreciated that reflection on the shared aspect of the identity, because I think that's where I see some of the most healthy expressions of it happening on college campuses. Is when we find each other, right? When geek-identified students find one another, the joy that happens in those moments is so palpable. How excited people get when they find someone who's just as passionate as they are about something, and they just start talking about it and lighting up and opening up. I find that to be very, very exciting, and certainly something that I would identify as a healthy expression.
I was just actually thinking about this morning because I felt the fatigue of like it's Sunday of Comic-Con. I have a strange mixture of caffeine and tequila mixing in my body over the last few days. And as exhausted as I was, like I truly am starting to feel that like physical exhaustion. The moment I got onto the convention floor, everyone is so overjoyed and just fulfilled and participating in something that is so special. And I had this kind of, I guess, this healing process where I'm like, I can do this for another day. I'm good.
I think the space I see it in, thinking about like communal spaces, is whenever we host game nights, either video game or tabletop or RPG stuff, people, I always say why I love being a part of Geek Week is like I've literally seen people form connections playing Dungeons and Dragons or playing Avalon for the first time and exchanging phone numbers and saying, I'm so excited to hang out with you, let's play again on Tuesday. And I've had students come back to me and say, oh, we play every single Tuesday night this whole year, and it's something that we started in September. And so I think that some of those communities sometimes people think of like gaming as being like a solo experience, especially when it's like computer games. But when you bring people together to like talk about that, they create these kind of like networks of folks that can relate and connect to each other and form these like resilient connections where they know they have these people they can always go to. And it starts off as a game, but it becomes so much more than that. And I think that geekdom kind of brings those like extreme like fandoms and like interests together in a way that's really special.
You know, one of my favorite quotes, and I can't remember, and I'm going to paraphrase it horribly. I can't remember who said it or how they said it. So, you know, this is just a thing I say from now on, is, you know, friendship is formed when you look at another and say, you too?
Yeah.
And I think that's really a core of sort of what the community piece that you all are talking about. I am of an age where most of my life, sort of the geeky side of my personality and my identity, was definitely something that I felt made a target of me. You know, I was when you look at the intersection of my identity as an African American, which is a marginalized identity, and then in these spaces, which is, you know, another marginalized identity, sort of felt very isolating. Can we talk about what some of that isolation might do, particularly around folks who can't find these communities, and sort of how that manifests itself and impacts folks?
I think if you're into things that are a little off-center, then you can feel like if you're the only one in your community that likes anime or whatever, you can feel like there's something wrong with you. I think you can internalize that as if I'm different and therefore I'm wrong. You know, I think we see that with any marginalized group where there's like this sense that if you're not in the mainstream, there's something wrong with you. And that's why there's so much joy when we find each other. You know, students sometimes are going from like some small town where they're the only person who had this really niche thing. And then they go to this campus community and there's a whole group centered around that niche thing. It's like, oh my God, what, you know, that's a game changer where there's not something wrong with me, that I'm just a little different, and that's okay, and I can appreciate that difference, and I can let it flourish. So that to me is where it can be kind of like, it can feel like a problem until you get that opportunity to expand it and share it.
I think there are layers to this too, because in appreciating the intersection of our identities and the multiple dimensions of that, when you're becoming a fan of many of these genres, there's a process there, and there's some realizations. Like, I loved so many things that didn't love me back. I love Star Wars. I don't exist in Star Wars. So to kind of wrestle at the get-go with loving all these genres and all these different narratives that like really don't care about you, it's already such a painful experience and a confusing experience, because you dive right in and you develop all these parasocial relationships, and you're so connected and so close. And so we see this landscape changing, which is great. But I also think that has a lot to do with the way that we're navigating and kind of negotiating how we then now feel a sense of belonging, a sense of community, and how we work through those pain points in hopefully potentially positive ways, and kind of still wrestle with those initial experiences.
Yeah, for me, like the only time I saw black people in Gotham was as a henchman that Batman was punching.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so sad. I think a lot of times as someone who reads a lot, you can see yourself in some of those characters. And I think that like that for me, and I know for students I've worked with, like that can really open a door for them to like kind of like a window into another life, either like a fantasy land or like a realistic, I think about like Fun Home by Alison Bechdel. What an amazing, it's one of my favorite books.
So
what an amazing story about coming out and, you know, being a young person and figuring out your family dynamics. And I think if you've never met someone else that has like a complicated family dynamic and you've never seen anything represented, you can feel so seen by a book, which is a wild idea. And I think it took me a long time to realize that I liked graphic novels because I thought they were like for kids or something, but there's so many incredible stories that are so relatable and tell a really important story of resilience or people struggling with something or stories of addiction, and how people have worked through that. And you don't just get like the story, of course it's great, like reading a book, but you get the visual, and so you can see people who look like you or you can identify with on a deeper level, and I think that that can really take people out of isolation.
I geek out about a lot of different things, including student development theory.
Yes.
And that's what your question about isolation immediately made me think of, is just so much of the research about college students in the US context tells us very clearly that if you're isolated, if you're marginal, if you don't feel a sense of connection to your college or university, you're going to have all kinds of different challenges. It's going to be really difficult for you to succeed academically. It's going to be difficult for you to feel happy or satisfied with your experience in college. And your odds of finishing are much lower than if you feel that sense of connection, if you don't feel that sense of isolation. And I think that's certainly, I see that a lot in the work we do in slug support, in particular, that a lot of our students who come to us in crisis don't feel connected, right? They don't have a community on the campus. They might have communities elsewhere, but they don't have that community, you know, at UC Santa Cruz. And so I think that kind of speaks to this idea of again, isolation and why that can be so devastating for students.
And I'll just add that sometimes those students also don't know even to look or how to access those things.
Yeah.
And if they see you wearing, like for me when I was teaching at USD, I would use, instead of talking about like, Jung has this theory that you need to have a hero that also has like this flaw. And so I would use Superman in Kryptonite. And that triggers some folks that, he's kind of into this world that I'm into. And then you can be a broker for that world because they don't sometimes have the skills to link and find or even know that there could be a link, and so they're just so used to being isolated, some of them. And so when you talk to those students and say, guess what? There's another group here, then all of a sudden, it changes their way of thinking completely about their isolation.
Yeah, that happens to me a lot when I wear my Geek Week shirts on campus. I know there's a lot, shout out to Geek Week people in the audience. Woo-hoo. And so I think having those items in my office and wearing a shirt sometimes on campus, like people will randomly come up to me that I don't know and say, oh, did you go to Geek Week? I'm like, oh, I helped organize it. Wow, this is what I liked. And I'll just say like, what are you into? What would you like to see more of? And a lot of times you're able to make those connections for students, like, oh, I really am into Super Smash Brothers. Oh, did you know there's a club that plays? This is how to get in touch with them. And I think that can really help students feel a lot less isolated.
It's an interesting thing when we talk about, I think folks who have been to the GeekED panels over the years, we talk a lot about how you put yourself out there and how you can use that to sort of connect with folks who might otherwise be marginalized. My office is I'm located physically within the Dean of Students office. We had an open house the other day, and I have a wall that's all sort of Funko Pops and superhero stuff, and I have a wall that's all Disney. And the Disney wall has different signs from the parks, and so I was just, because I'm nerdy, when we had the open house, I just put my iPhone on and Disney ride music, just below where people would kind of go, what is that? And so many students just sort of wandered into my office and just were like, it's a Small World playing? And I connected with so many students just by sort of presenting that. And since then, I've had a steady stream of students who aren't necessarily in crisis, and it helped me because normally I am dealing exclusively with students in crisis, but a steady stream of students who are just like, hey, my friend told me you have a cool office. And I'm like, I do in fact have a cool office. Please come in and see my cool office. And so when you talk, Brian, about sort of student development theory and isolation, I think a lot of us who work in higher education really resonate with that and really resonate with the importance of finding a community at your college. I also think that as technology has moved on, folks have found communities beyond the college, particularly through online and social media means. And those communities can have different impacts. And some of those communities, as important as community is, some of those communities can be toxic. Can folks talk about sort of what it means when somebody does sort of engage in a community, but that community isn't necessarily the healthiest place to be?
It's really easy to make inauthentic online communities. I think anyone who's in a social media, using one of the social media platforms knows that we oftentimes put, without realizing it, our best foot forward and make it seem like things are pretty glamorous and great all the time, because no one's posting when they're kind of sitting at home alone eating ice cream. And, so then people see that, and then it looks as though my life is boring, it's not as exciting, I don't have as many friends, I'm not smiling as much, and you kind of compare yourself against this false version of reality. And I think I'm talking more broadly than I think your question is, but I just think in general, social media kind of has a tendency to lean toward the best kind of paper tiger, best version of what people want their lives to be, and then we compare that with what our soft spots are, some of our challenges individually.
Yeah, I mean, related to that, I look at the research that shows that students today have there's more availability and access to community building through social media and through digital means, and yet reported feelings of isolation are increasing. And so there's this sort of paradox going on, and I think it's important for us to unpack that and try to figure out why is that happening, and how do we leverage our knowledge about those communities. There's this sort of relationship we have where, I don't know if the word is ambidextrous, but where there are some digital natives and some folks that kind of are in the cusp of that, where we should embrace some of those platforms and some of that media, but also utilize our knowledge of different expertise to be able to guide and mentor and reveal some of those pitfalls and the dangers of what could be toxic and what could be harmful for students.
There's a really good book about that exact phenomenon. It's a couple years old, so it's probably dated by now, because it just is evolving so quickly. It's called Alone Together, and it's just about how we're more interconnected than ever before, but everybody feels more alone than before, which is such a sad phenomenon. I've had students, on sort of a different note, make really embarrassing and very challenging mistakes online, and I feel like a lot of the resident directors I work with have seen things like this, where someone posts something. I had a student I responded to that posted something really racist online, and someone screen capped it. They thought it was a private community group, and someone screen capped it and sent it to a whole bunch of people, and it went viral in less than 5 hours, and people are tweeting, this person shouldn't be here, they should get expelled, and things like that. And the impact of that student, just one thing they said making a huge ripple effect. And then I think it's really important to have professionals around that can talk to that student and sort of unpack, okay, you made a mistake, it's not the end, but you need to really take accountability for your actions, and also think about how you can move forward not doing this again, or taking ownership over that. And I think that so much of our lives are so public now, and people do generally put their best foot forward, but when they think that they're surrounded by a community that all agrees with them, and sometimes online communities you can get into that very niche interest. And I know some geek communities have they have some really challenging comment sections and things. And so I think just being really conscientious about who you're surrounding yourself with, and is it really something you agree with that you'd want everyone to see. That's a really hard reality that I'm really glad didn't exist when I was 18.
Yeah, I think my opinion is that in the higher education space, we have a bias toward helping students to develop skills for IRL community living, right? How to be physically in the same place as people and be a good quality community member who has mindfulness of your impact on other people and what have you. And we don't really lean into how does that translate into virtual spaces? How does that translate into online spaces? Some folks may do better than others, but I think it's still an area where, as a whole, and I include myself in this for sure, we really need to be stretching into much more intentionally and really helping proactively, right? Students think about, you're going to be engaging in these kinds of spaces, as well as people who are living in your residence hall. And so how are we helping you to think about what does that mean? What's very similar about those kinds of relationships? What's really different about those kinds of relationships? What kinds of norms exist in those different spaces? And how do we prepare you? How do we help you be thoughtful about both how you want to represent yourself, but then also what to do when you experience the kind of conduct that sometimes does happen in these online communities, or when you see something that perhaps is being expressed in a way that people feel, more barriers to expressing in real life, right? In terms of the things that might be hateful or hurtful.
Interesting anecdote as Sarah was talking, and then when you were talking, Brian, I can share, and I'm going to hold back a lot of the details because of the student involved, but we did in our in my office have a student who had said some unfortunate things in a very public online forum that was just her and her boyfriend hanging out in the room, forgot that they sort of had the camera on, and what happened was pretty instantly the community that she was a part of, as a collective, decided that not only did they not like what she said, but they really wanted to take steps. And so this happened on a Sunday night. By Monday morning, people in the community had called the chancellor, the vice chancellor. I had 3 emails, the dean of students, and had basically said very publicly, we want this person to be kicked out of school for having done this. And to your point, Sarah, it was sort of the job of my office to reach out and provide support. And so part of what happens when we talk about students existing in community, and those community meaning a variety of things, is I think one of the modern aspects of community, particularly in online spaces, is the use of shame as sort of a vengeance tactic. And when we're talking about folks who physically live in a small community, and this is true for I think all of us, but digitally live in a worldwide community, how do we help folks reconcile the fact that, one day I made a stupid mistake that is now instantly searchable and may follow me for the rest of my life, and to your point, something I did stupid when I was 18. Because let me tell you something, the number of stupid things I did when I was 18 are immense, and I, as an individual, don't necessarily have to live with the consequence, but many of our students do. So what does it mean for someone to be sort of exposed on a international or global scale for sort of what developmentally is probably something that everybody kind of does, and what do we do to kind of find ways to support them?
I think what's hard is like on a major difference between like an online community and IRL, I like that, is that you can't block someone in real life. Like they still live on your floor, they still live in your community. I mean, unless I guess they're expelled, but that takes a lot of steps. And I think students don't always understand that. Sometimes it's appropriate, but that's a really complicated conversation to say like you can't go to college anymore because of like a videotape, or that's so challenging. But I think that like it's really important I definitely agree with you that we need to be more on like the front end of having proactive conversations with students about online presence, and because it's both such an amazing opportunity for support when I think about mental health and people reaching out if they're feeling depressed or suicidal, things like that. Like that can be a great source of support to have an online community. At the same time, like it can also be like a very damaging thing when you kind of are in this like silo where you think everyone agrees with you or thinks like you. And so I think helping students understand that you can navigate those spaces where maybe not everybody agrees with you, but you can still exist and change and grow. It's a really hard thing to like coach someone through or to like walk someone through.
I think the shame that you talked about and the vengeance that can come from that, like, I think there's a lot we don't know. I think there's people that are like my age range that didn't grow up memorializing all their stupid decisions and thoughts, when they were in high school and then early in college, like, so for me
last week.
Yeah. Well, now I know not to put those on social media, but it's just, we don't really know a lot because I think people haven't really put as much thought into it. They just think, oh, there's a translation there, but the rules are different on social media. They're not clear, they're ambiguous. Yeah. It doesn't feel like real life in a lot of ways, and so you sometimes have your inhibitions lowered, like, it's kind of a different world, and people aren't really taking the time, I think, to make that more concrete and then to share that and start having conversations about that aspect of social media. So I really agree with that kind of suggestion that's come up on the panel.
I do think we have a sense of responsibility around how we're approaching it with our empathy and demonstrating that, kryptonite, right? Like, everybody has... everyone isn't perfect, and so we make mistakes and we say things we regret and we do things that maybe had a different intention. And so how do we model that empathy and how do we model that resilience and demonstrate a willingness to kind of work with somebody and help them understand the repercussions? I do think that there's a responsibility at the front end to educate and talk about, like, okay, on this campus or in this landscape, these would be the consequences. Students don't know that if they tweet about their professor, there's a case manager is going to knock on their door or call them or email them and say, like, you're threatening your professor, right? We need to talk about this. Yeah. So I think there's, on the front end, some education and some ambassador work that needs to happen, and then throughout, as students, because they will, as they make mistakes and as they have setbacks, we really have to demonstrate a willingness to forgive and have empathy and work with them on the resolution.
Yeah, I've never really thought that much about the possible connections between the way people engage virtually and what is happening more now in kind of more in-person ways of showing up in community, and especially like navigating conflict, right? Yeah. I keep going back to this idea, like, right, there's not a block button in real life. No, there isn't. And yet, I think that what I feel like I hear a lot more from college students is when someone in real life does something that is problematic, they want to cancel them, right? Yeah. They're like, that person needs to be gone. Yeah. And while on the one hand that can feel really frustrating to me as an educator and as someone who feels a sense of responsibility to all the students who are at UC Santa Cruz, I also understand it, right? I can grasp, like, why is that happening in this day and age? Well, if the only things you see modeled for you, or the most of the things you see modeled for you in terms of, like, somebody makes a mistake is attack, right? Get rid of them. Then why wouldn't that be the place that you default to in terms of your own response when you feel hurt? So this idea of modeling, I think, is so important. And for me, I think a lot about the concept of restorative justice and how we can really start incorporating that and infusing that more in different ways, right? So, like, when the case manager knocks on your door, that they're not there to cancel you, right? They're not there to be like, you did something wrong and it's time for you to go. They're there to reflect back, right? Maybe, like, I want to know more about what was going on with you, like, right? What's happening for you that you're saying this? And I also want to help you to understand, like, this is the impact that's having, right? And so what are we going to do about that? To have more opportunities to model for students and with students those kinds of ways of responding where the objective isn't to push someone out, but to figure out how to get them reconnected seems especially important.
I think in higher education, a lot of times we're up against the power of bringing this back to the fandom communities and the fact that a fandom community could cancel a director from a Marvel movie or could express, displeasure with a choice or a belief that somebody has. And we see this happening where a community can have power over the creatives in really big ways. And so there are lessons, they're learning opportunities for us because we can use those as examples, but certainly that operates very differently than how usually how we would.
And how important is the conflict resolution skill set that you would learn if you couldn't cancel someone and you actually go talk to that person and try to find a middle ground or try to resolve it, even if you don't have the outcome you want, being able to control a little bit more of your mood and your reaction, and those are all skills that we need throughout our lives, and if we miss those opportunities because we learn to cancel instead, we get more divisiveness, right?
And it seems like part of this is the experience for the individual of not having had a community, finding a community, and embracing and being embraced by that community, and then being sort of exercised from that community. We talk a lot in higher ed about resilience and how to teach folks how to survive and thrive after difficult circumstances. To bring this back to sort of I'm here at Comic-Con. This is my 21st Comic-Con. I knew Comic-Con existed, but I couldn't afford to go to Comic-Con until I was 28 years old. And it has meant the world to me. Comic-Con is sort of my happy place, and it recharges me, even though I'm pre-exhausted for this week. I'm already exhausted from my work week. What are the lessons that we can draw from pop culture to aid students who are having difficult times in resilience? What are the things that we can draw to help people survive and thrive?
Well, Batman. So
I do know Batman. He's a good friend of mine.
Period.
Well, yeah, that's all you need to know. We've talked about this a lot, Al, in the sense of, how does the utilization of fictional narrative give us the opportunity to even approach these questions and discuss these issues with students? And so for me as a psychologist, a lot of times I realize that we can connect more quickly. There's a shortcut. There's a process that happens if maybe we can talk about a relationship or a trauma or a story that we both know about, and kind of just start there and let that be kind of the gateway into more serious conversations. So I tend, I talk about Lord of the Rings, I talk about Frodo and Sam. I'm a trauma psychologist, and we'll offer that up as like, I can't take that ring, I can't carry that trauma, but I can carry you. I can be with you as you go through this journey. And so sometimes using even just that example, that narrative or a shared story can just be a foundational entry into some more serious conversations. And you don't have to know everything about every fandom. That's too much pressure for us. But certainly even just the curiosity around okay, so tell me about Steven Universe, or tell me about this comic you're reading, or I had a student tell me that Pirates of the Caribbean, who's the pirate?
Jack Sparrow.
So see, I know so little about it, but the student was like, everything was all about Jack Sparrow, right?
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, so tell me about Jack, let's talk about Jack Sparrow. And we connected so much over this non-existent character, but I think it was my willingness to kind of be in that space with him and to learn more about what feelings he was having about his alignment with this character. And I find that much more effective than just going straight to so tell me all the horrible things that are going on, or tell me about your personal trauma or the abuse. That we can get to, but I think that once you form this sort of psychological safety, and I think that also that shared connection of oh, so you're not going to judge me for liking Jack Sparrow or Steven Universe or Batman. Not at all. I really embrace parasocial relationships, and I think there's a lot we can learn from that.
I've heard you talk about this, that you use these character examples. It finally happened to me this year. I haven't even gotten to tell you this yet. But I had a student who was having a really hard time and considering a leave of absence, and I was like, I think just because I have so much Geek Week stuff in my office, she said, when I'm having a hard time, I feel like the Hulk. And the Hulk isn't something I know about the Hulk, but not a lot. And I was like, oh, tell me more about that. And it's I just feel like I'm busting out of my skin, so upset. And I'm it is this gateway of a different, in some ways safer way to put a name to something that a student might be experiencing, but they don't necessarily have the vocabulary to express. I don't know how else you would explain that. And it really helped me understand how serious this was, and this sense of loss of control, but that okay, so like let's find a way that you can keep yourself like a little bit more centered, where you don't feel like you're breaking out of your skin and turning into this monster with your roommates and other people in your life. It was such a good example. And then I think that it is this great segue to be able to actually talk about what's really going on. It's like this, like, okay, I shared this little part in this like kind of quirky example, and now I can share how I really feel, because you didn't freak out when I said I'm the Hulk. Ugh.
So as a participant in many different fandoms, and as someone who likes to find ways to connect that love and that passion into the work that I do with students, I have to say this is an area where I'd like to see more and different things from my fandoms. Because when I think about this idea of, okay, well, like what examples of like healthy response to trauma can I think of? For example, like in superhero lore, I can't think of very many because, and perhaps because those stories aren't considered especially dramatic or interesting, right? Like, I mean, I think of Batman. He had a particular response to trauma. Would I say that that's healthy? No.
He's not so well.
Right? Or, I can think of all these, Scarlet Witch erased people from the universe because of a response to trauma. Is that healthy? No, right? The Avengers, who survived the snapping, apparently spent 5 years doing lots of maladaptive things.
I like to call it the snapture. Go on.
The snapture also works, right? And so it's hard sometimes to find the example of but where's the thing that, so I'd love to see from my fandoms more stories of, right here, it's actually really interesting and really dramatic and really cool to see someone navigate through trauma and figure out a way to incorporate that trauma into a healthy, new sense of themselves moving forward.
Might I point you to my hat? Go on.
What's that?
Might I point you to my hat?
Well, Superman, that guy. Yeah. So I think that was the end of that thought for me.
I think we talked at the beginning. This is kind of nice that we're talking about this now. We talked at the beginning about how that the comics and the pop media kind of it resonates for us because it says something about us, but we don't play in that sandbox without having that kind of go out into our lives. And so then when we leave and go out into the real world and we are IRLing out there, those stories are with us and they are a part of us and they are part of how, I realized I was thinking about the two of you actually before this panel, and I made some good assumptions about you both. I thought, because we think so much about heroes and we're interested in this world, I think you guys are probably very thoughtful about where you are on the hero's journey and the ethics of your own personal journey that you're on, and I don't know if that's true. I think that's a safe assumption about both of you, and I think maybe that's a little bit of the camaraderie that we have. But the idea that those decision points, and when Spider-Man throws his suit into a trash can, and then decides to come back and put it back on, those are things that stick with us and help us persevere when we're confronted with the challenges that are not Green Goblin, but are, posting something stupid on social media or whatever. And they help us kind of get into that resilience and that strength that we sometimes lose sight of. And those stories will bring it back, I think.
I mean, one of the things I find most powerful in working with students in crisis is to, and you talked a little bit about this, Drea, is to not necessarily go right into the trauma, but to ask them to share something that they're really passionate about. And I would imagine for folks at this convention, if you pick your fandom, and if somebody genuinely, authentically says, hey, tell me about that, it is a joyful experience, right? You say, hey, Al, I hear you're really into DC Comics. I'm like, okay, sit down. You've got an hour? And it
just an hour, Al?
Well, I mean, I have a 5-day seminar plan, but it brings a sort of joy up, and what I find, and I spent some time, we can talk later about sort of what it means to have totems. And when we play in the space of sort of the heroic narrative, and so particularly in superhero comics, there's the idea of everybody has a symbol, and I have a strong belief that these symbols can become totems, that is an item through which you can draw power. And I think for a lot of folks, and the totem can be anything, it is something that you imbue with the power. It doesn't inherently have the power itself. And when you get someone talking about something that they really genuinely love and believe in, there's a mechanism, I think, that human beings can then start to draw power reserves that they didn't heretofore have, and it's power that they've imbued with it with through study and passion and sort of the love of that fandom.
Can I say something about that real quick?
Yeah.
They did a study with 5-year-olds where they had them do a task while they had distractions around them. And the kids, they had one group of kids put on a Batman cape and call themselves Batman as they did the task. And those kids did a better job sticking with the task, not getting distracted by the iPad. And that's also true of adults. They have a lot of, if you self-talk in a third person, say, Brent, you got this, that you're going to do better. That's a skill that helps you achieve. And so I think what you're describing, there's research behind that, like that really is a skill that we can use. And I think I geek out like that. I'll pretend like I'm Batman, trying to get through the harder times of my life. I'll see what would Batman do here.
I pretend like I'm Batman way more than an adult should.
I do it in here.
On a day-to-day. I mean, I don't ever say it out loud, but those who know me and see me day, you know when I'm doing it.
And similarly, about 10 years ago, I did a study on cosplayers, and I looked at all these different factors, like what drives cosplayers, what's fulfilling about it. With so much money and time is spent, so much dedication and commitment. And as a cosplayer myself, I was sort of examining, like, why do we do this? My feet are hurting after 8 hours of being in the, like there's some payoff here. And the most common elements actually were about what you're talking about. It's this sort of like internal fulfillment. Many people described it as like an experience where they actually, it's bizarre, it's paradoxical. They actually felt more like themselves in that costume than when they're not in the costume. And many cosplayers reported back that they felt the costume enhanced existing characteristics that they had already experienced. So a sense of empowerment, a sense of importance, a sense of strength, a sense of being visible, a sense of being a part of a Justice League or belonging. And that aspect of visibility, for somebody to stop you and say, can I have a picture with you? I love what you did. I love your costume. I see you. That visibility was so fulfilling. And for some of us, we don't experience that. We experience a lot of invisibility. And to have that just be done in this very positive way, in that positive experience, makes all of that hard work worth it.
We have like 2 or 3 minutes, so if anybody's got a question, probably have time for 1, maybe 2. Yeah, Nathan.
I actually have a great example. So I'm also a big fan of restorative justice, and I used to do a lot more of it in my previous position. I think it's a lens that I put on that I don't ever take off now, viewing my work in like a restorative way. And I had a parent call me one time and say, I want you to take their roommate to restorative justice, like, and I was like, that's not really what it's about. I wouldn't use it like that. But I think what I love about restorative justice is it actually strengthens community, and it says, like, I have a responsibility to you. As a community member, we all have a collective responsibility to each other, and even though you've caused a harm, it's also on me to repair that relationship and to, like, in a healing and compassionate way. So how can we do that together and come to, like, a mutual understanding? I think that, to me, is, like, what I would like justice to become.
Truth, restorative justice in the American way.
And I just want to announce I'm starring in a new CBS procedural, Restorative Justice, next season. So
Yes.
Look for that. Do you have?
I just want to quickly say, if you're looking for where that exists in these narratives, one of the reasons I became a psychologist was because I started watching Batman the Animated Series as a kid. That's completely true. And they really unpack sort of the villain's narrative in such a different way that you have that grayness, and you have actually Batman dealing with exactly what you're talking about. How do I humanize the people that are trying to do harm, and how do I empathize with them? How do I mirror myself? I see myself in these people, and do they deserve to have? Do they deserve the forgiveness? Do they deserve rehabilitation? Many of the episodes deal with one villain, and it's that story. So I recommend that you listen to my podcast. No, the podcast does deal with the animated series, but I recommend the animated series if you're interested in, like, where this exists and kind of like our comic mythos.
And it's an excellent podcast, by the way. That's the time we have. Thank you so much. We'll be back in 10 minutes with our next panel.